Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Theater. It's the podcast that takes a look at relationships and mental health through the lens of movies, TV, and pop culture. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I've got a master's degree in marriage and family counseling and therapy, and I'm a practicing therapist in Music City, USA. I'm on a mission to help people more easily understand mental health and relationships and help break down the stigmas surrounding counseling and therapy. And that's why every week a guest therapist and I talk about a movie and what relationship or mental health issues it highlights. Thanks so much for downloading today's show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes, and while you're doing that, help other people find the show by giving it a 5-star rating and writing a review for it in the podcast app. This month, we've got a goal of hitting 40 individual 5-star ratings. If you like what you hear each week on the show, click through to the show's page in the podcast app and give it those 5 stars. We really do appreciate you helping us accomplish our mission of making mental health easier to understand and engage with. Today in the theater, my guest is PaQuita Pullen. PaQuita is a counselor in Nashville who has a passion towards African American men and believes that all of us are hardwired for connection. She brought with her 2002's Antwone Fisher. IMDb says it's about a young Navy man, Antwone Fisher, being forced to see a psychiatrist after a violent outburst against a fellow crewman. During the course of treatment, a painful past is revealed and a new hope begins. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different than most. Today won't have Leanne joining me at the end to wrap things up. We've had a crazy few weeks celebrating family members getting married, and as we all know, every time you say yes to one thing, you say no to something else. So she stepped away from the show this week so she could step toward some other things. But rest assured, she'll be back next week. Let's jump right into it. Dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Hi, PaQuita.
Hi, Josh.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited for you to be here. I'm even more excited that you're taking advantage of the fidgets that I have in here, because not many guests do that.
Gotta be free, man.
Yeah, and I don't know. Every session I'm working my fidget over here, so I don't know how people go without doing that.
Yeah, when I'm in session, I don't get the opportunity to play with fidgets because they're for my clients, right? And so sitting here, I'm like kind of on the other side,
yeah.
so gotta
Highly
take advantage.
recommend keeping one on your side table. Highly recommend.
That's a really good recommendation.
Well, I like to start every episode by asking my guests, why therapy? Why do you do what you do?
Okay, so the short answer is therapy chose me.
Okay.
Right? I think many times and oftentimes we are taught from little kids, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And there's this notion that we have to find it, right? Like, you grow up, you pick out what you want to do, and you do it. Mm-hmm. And I think, for me, I didn't declare major in undergrad probably until like my 3rd year. And I was like, I'm going to do psychology. And for me, the natural
Had you taken a class that introduced you to it, or?
I mean, so for your general recs, you have to take general psych.
Okay.
But other than that, no, I just took general psych. I think that there were things that I had been experiencing, and kind of, we all get to that point where things come to a head. And I was journaling and getting some things out, and the next day I was like, I'm going to declare my major and go into psychology. So I finished that, and then I started grad school pretty much immediately. Wow. I think what keeps me doing therapy is connection, right? Like, relationships really at the core of who I am. Like, it's all about relationship.
And you're an LPC?
I'm an LPC.
That's interesting to me that connection would be so high up there, but you didn't go LMFT.
Well, I didn't go LMFT for a couple of reasons. Shout out to my LMFTs. I love you all. So from my story, though, so LMFTs, I know, looks at systems, right? A lot. For me and my journey, it's a lot about that individual. How do you impact the system What can you do to kind of pull yourself up by the bootstraps?
So intrapersonal rather than interpersonal.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes. So that's why I chose that route. I have lots of respect for LMFT. At some points, I'm like, like that would have made sense. But I love being able to connect with the individual and helping them kind of tap into their power, into their purpose, into all of these things, kind of regardless of what else has been there, right?
Sure.
So it's like, how do I help you make sense of things in the context of a system, but also so that you're not bound by that system?
Yeah. I was explaining to somebody before kind of what the difference is, and also qualifying with ultimately, most of us find therapists based on word of mouth recommendations. And so the letters after the name don't really end up being the thing that drives you. But ultimately, I said, LPCs typically will look to understand someone in the context of that person's story. MFTs will look to understand that person in the context of their systems and relationships. And so we can do pretty much the same things, but we just kind of look at the world in different ways.
Absolutely. And there's room for both.
Yeah.
And, we need them all. I think also another issue, or not necessarily issue, another piece to that is, when you have issues in your system that you maybe don't want to look at, or maybe it's you don't want to be a part of this system for whatever reason, and at the time when I was going through all of this, that's kind of where I was. I'm like, forget that.
Yeah.
I want
to work on me.
I want to work on me. Like I don't want to be bound by this. I don't want someone to tell me this, that, so it was just all about where I was personally.
Yeah. It worked for you.
Yep.
So that's kind of the why. Is there anything that your practice and your work kind of centers around today?
Kind of. So my work doesn't necessarily center around any particular population or issue. I'm all about, like I said, connection and relationship. First, connection with yourself. I think that your connection with yourself is one of the most important relationships you'll have outside of, your connection with your higher power, whatever that looks like. I feel like it comes down to those two relationships being most important.
Sure.
But my passion population or passion work is really surrounded by African American men. That is what I hope to really get more into. It changes what that looks like for me. Pretty often. I'm a 7 on the Enneagram. So the umbrella, is there, but it's really too about relationship and how do we connect with African American men better and really help with their mental health and their struggles in the context of relationships.
Sure. Was there anything in particular that drew you to that or lit that passion inside of you?
That's another thing that it's kind of tricky to me. I love Black men. I always have. I think part of who I am too is that sometimes it's not what you see is what you don't see. And I feel like there are lots of things and issues that impact Black men in particular. And it makes me want to be the person to be like, oh no, wait guys, like this is actually what it is. Like this is not just what you think. So I don't know. And plus, I'm Black, African American. So yeah.
So is it that maybe like, you see a group of people who have needs that are specific to them and you feel like, hey, we have as mental health professionals really, had a deficit in care for them?
Absolutely. I think that we have definitely had a deficit in caring for them. I think I would say that for many marginalized groups, but I think that they are like a subgroup that, when you look at it statistically, like are high in homelessness and incarceration and severe and persistent mental illness. But but least likely to go to treatment, right? And lots of the textbooks, which I'm not here to argue about textbooks, but say, oh, they're not likely to look for treatment, or they're more likely to go to the church, which is fine. But then for me, I'm like, well, what are you doing that says you invite them to counseling? What are you, what messages are you putting out there that says, hey, I care, hey, I'm available, and I can actually meet you where you are and help you navigate through that?
Yeah. Or even, I would imagine that for a person who feels marginalized to come to a therapist, I mean, like I have a sign up in the office that says all are welcome. I really mean it. But if you've got to explain the context of your story, and if you've got to teach me the language of your story every time you come in and tell a part of it, then that could be a hindrance to us keeping the work going, versus if you're able to go to a therapist who speaks the same language, who knows the same story, the speed with which you're going to be able to join and the ease of which that you're going to be able to talk is going to be a lot different.
Absolutely.
Like, both people can still care the same amount, but it's going to be like just kind of looking how can you I don't know, just make it easier.
But I think it's the process, right? Like the flow, the process, and what does that look like?
Yeah.
I think too, so I have this philosophy. It's not really rooted in research or anything, but I have this philosophy that, the state of Black men is going to take the love of a Black woman to kind of mitigate that. And what I mean by that, like, you'll see kind of, if you look at our history or our culture, like there's always like a matriarch, right? Like every man has a song about, his mama, or, that one special love that he has, or, different things like that, or their best friend. Like, many Black men have some strong Black female, I don't want to say character. I don't know what word I'm trying to say.
Caretaker?
Not even necessarily caretaker. I mean, I guess in a sense,
but certainly presence, like in their
some
life.
Some presence, yeah, some strong, and it can be mentorship. It can be, someone at their church. It can be someone that they work with. Like, I see that, and I think that there's a lot of value in being able to have that strength and have kind of that language and connection that you say, and that understanding. But there's also like this nurturing, and it's like, I see you. And I love you just the way you are, but I love you too much to let you stay that way.
Sure. Genuine question is, in African American culture, does a woman of influence and authority just carry with her more weight, like more influence, to be able to speak into the life of a Black man?
That is a good question that I've never really considered. I would say maybe yes.
Because I know from watching movies, even Tyler Perry has said the reason why he created the Medea character was because he felt like there was a Medea in so many Black families. Even in the movie that we're going to talk about today, at one point they're saying Madir, which he said is what that came from.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that Black women, and I know I'm biased and it's okay, but we have this beautiful, sweet strength about us. We can carry a lot. And we can influence a lot. And I think that there is a lot of power there. I'll have to ponder that some more, but I definitely think that there could be something.
Well, when we have you back on again, it'll be great to have. It'll be great to have that, as something that you've been able to consider. Do you think you're kind of highlighting this, like I think you called it a sweet strength in African American women? Do you think that in particular is able to call something out of an African American man?
Oh, absolutely.
What do you think that is?
If I had to put words to it, the first ones that come up is I don't know.
Okay.
But I think, to be seen though, for you to have strength, right? And this sweetness and this caring, and to actually see this person, right? Like it's about that connection. And I believe that when we're connected, there's all kinds of things that come out of us, things that, maybe we are scared, but maybe we're not so scared to do it now. Maybe we kind of believed it, but now that somebody else that I kind of look up to and admire believes it, maybe it makes it a little bit more believable. I think,
like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like the need to belong, that's at the base of the thing. So just that basic piece of connection, like I love what you're saying about seeing somebody. Like if you, I the first 10 years of my career, I was working with middle school students, and I would tell volunteers every Sunday, like I want every kid that walks in this door to have a high five and for you to know their name, because when they enter into a school, it's really easy for them to be invisible. And I want them to know that they matter. And the easiest way to do that is to let them know that we see them. Absolutely.
And to know that they're needed.
Sure.
I think that is another thing, that needs to be another need that needs to be articulated, as in like you matter, like you matter. When we look at, the history of Black people in this country, and like, how Black men were taken from their families, and like all of those things, we could get into all of that, but I think that it sets this precedent, so to speak, that you're not really needed. And I think that we all want to matter.
Yeah, it's systemic.
We all want to matter. Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. So that kind of brings us into talking about the movie. What movie did you bring for us to talk about today?
I brought Antwone Fisher.
Antwone Fisher. I was super surprised by this movie. Okay. I mean, I had like known about it in the way that, you kind of remember vaguely hearing about something. But I didn't know what it was about. And I was telling somebody, I love Denzel. It's pretty tough to not love Denzel. When I was in 8th grade, I was in like an English honors class or something, and I don't remember anything from that class except that Denzel Washington is a Sagittarius, because every day in that class, the teacher, Miss Felix, would hold up a framed picture of Denzel that she kept on her desk while she was at her podium, and she would talk about him at the beginning of every class. And so
the
love for Denzel started early. It was developed early there. But I was super surprised by this movie. Why did you choose this movie?
So I chose this movie for lots of reasons. Obviously, just based on our conversation that we just had, I definitely wanted to highlight the experience of a Black man, right? For those who have seen Antwone Fisher, you see kind of his journey of looking beyond what's just there, right? And how easy it could have been to have been like, oh, he's just angry. He just, he's avoidant, all of these fancy labels that we counselors go to school to learn, right? But just seeing and unpacking his story and actually being able to see all of the strength and resiliency there, right? And how really his connection with Denzel, who plays as his psychiatrist, which I think is hilarious. I don't know why I think that's hilarious, but I mean, Denzel, like, if Denzel was my psychiatrist,
would you get any work done?
I probably wouldn't get any work done. I'd be like, so tell me about this movie, Denzel. And, I would be so fascinated and wanting to hear his story that I would not get any work done. But it's also about that connection and how when we take just that extra step, right? Just that extra step to sit with people in their stuff and move when they're ready, what can come from that?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's based on, I don't know if you could say it's based on a true story, because Antwone Fisher wrote it. So like the character that is Derek Luke is playing, Antwone Fisher, like he wrote the movie about himself. And so, it's not based on a true story. It's autobiographical, like the guy wrote it. And when it starts, it's got him as a young man standing in this field of, I don't know what it is, like crops or wheat or something. I don't know. It's on a farm, you know, and it's just this kind of like dream or trance state that's just full of symbolism. And as it's kind of playing out and I'm taking it in, I'm starting to kind of like pick up on that and just go, oh, I don't know what any of this stuff means, but you know, we'll see. You know, he's in this field, he goes to this barn, there is he is a kid in the dream. So there's this large adult, which as a kid, every adult is large, who kind of reaches down, and you keep seeing, I think there's 3 or 4 times during this dream where somebody, an adult, extends a hand and he puts his hand in their hand. And this first adult, you see the disparity in size between his small kid hand and his like giant adult hand. Pulls him in, tons of people in there. He gets sit at a table, 3 big fluffy pancakes gets put down in front of him, and then he kind of gets like snapped out of it, and he's in the present day. You know, what is it about Antwone Fisher's story that sticks out to you? Like, what is it about his...
There's so many things about his story that stick out to me. The initial thing, I thank you for pointing out, you know, this adult that extends their hand. When you look at the movie even more closely, it's a black woman each time, and kind of like a mother figure who sticks her hand out to him.
I thought the first one was the preacher.
Was it the preacher?
I think so.
Okay.
But
I remember the bigger woman kind of with the African garb, kind of like motioning him in. So I just watched the movie the other day, but you know, so yeah, but like, yes, like this extents, but when he comes in, like, you know, and for those who know Antwone Fisher, a lot of it was also kind of like surrounding his mother, right? And his relationship with his foster mother and Nadine, who was a part of
which did not know Viola Davis was in this. Like that hit
me. I know.
And she worked that ability to have the one tear fall from one. That's like her signature move.
And she also says like 6 words.
Yeah.
Right? He says, "Who's Antwone Quentin Fisher?" And she says, "That's my firstborn son."
Yep.
He walks in, and I don't know why I find this tickling, but I find it tickling because a lot of it is cultural, right? And she says, "You want something to eat?" And he's just looking at her like, I literally have not seen you in like 25 years. Yeah. And her first offering to him was...
Where was that in was she in Cleveland? Because he kept saying, okay. Because I was thinking like, I mean, I'm from like South Carolina, and that is when you go visit family that is, you know, an older woman, like that is what...
That's what you do, right? Like, food is important.
Oh yeah,
you know. But
I think it's a way of welcoming people.
It's so amazing to me. It's tickling in a good way because you know, she's like, I don't know what else I have to offer you right now, and I know that I have given you a lot of mess, but I can feed you.
Sure,
you know. And then she says nothing else.
Yeah, but that's jumping to the end. So like,
I'm sorry.
No. We're good. So what, you know, about his story tracks with you? Like, what sticks out?
I think if I had to name what sticks out, I really think it is his resiliency. The resiliency and strength in his story, and no matter what he went through, even though he went through a lot, like he went through lots of things, his ability to kind of keep going sticks out to me, and not necessarily give up and try to do better for himself. And then I think that he finally hit a crossroad, or hit a point where he had to ask for help because he realized he couldn't do it on his own.
Or he was mandated to ask for help.
He was mandated to help.
At the beginning, yeah.
At the beginning. And as you know, he sat in the office for like 6 weeks and did not say anything. And then he started to talk a little bit. Denzel Washington. I forgot what his name was.
Oh, yeah. So I pulled up the IMDb page because I am terrible at character names.
Yes, what was it?
So Dr. Jerome Davenport. So
Yes,
Davenport, I
Dr.
think
Davenport.
yeah.
And he says 3 sessions, here's a book.
But they start when you start talking.
Hit the, and after he does that, and so he opens up and he has these 3 sessions, and then he tells him like the sessions are over. And, he comes back and he's like angry, right, and upset. And he says, I slipped up when I talked to you, and he says, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
He said, I don't know what to do. So even though he was mandated and even though he was avoidant, he finally opened up, and then he was able to realize that he actually needs help and he could not do it.
That was him asking.
Yes. To me, that was him asking.
Yeah. Well, I think to anybody.
Yeah. I don't know, I think even just that trust piece of, okay, I'm going to trust you to start opening up. Now we realize that it is a movie, so we only have 2 hours, but he opened up pretty quickly about some things, some pretty hard things that can be difficult for anyone to kind of talk about when you've carried it around for so long.
Yeah. I think one of the things that, stuck out to me about just his beginning of his time with Davenport was, even though he said, I'm not going to talk, he still showed up.
He did.
So, like, my first thought, I'm sure this is why Denzel just kept sticking with it, was he's showing up. That's saying something. Because if he's saying, I'm not going to talk, true, he was mandated. But, at that point, he's already been, I don't know what the right word is, demoted or decommissioned or something. Like, he had a stripe taken away. And so, really, he could have just, and I think Denzel even asked him at one point, do you want to get discharged? And he said no. Right. So he's showing up. And at that point, it's just a matter of Davenport going, I can wait you out, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he finally, and I love how it happened. He like clears his throat. And Davenport's like, excuse me, what? He's like, oh, I didn't say anything. I was clearing my throat. And it just starts happening that way. So let's go back to resiliency. So in the movie, Antwone Fisher, in real life, he becomes a guy who is extremely successful by any measure. He speaks 3 languages. He was in the armed service. He wrote a movie. He has, a book that's geared towards helping young men, like very successful. Is resiliency success?
Resiliency is not success. Sorry, I said that wrong. So take that.
No,
out.
you did. You said it right. Resiliency is not success.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. Resiliency is not success. Resiliency, like I said, how I defined it earlier, is your ability to keep going. So success, in America, in our families, in our relationships, we all define what success looks like, right? So it's this general term that we all use and say, hey, Josh, you're successful. Hey, Antwone, you're successful. Yeah. But it's such an individualized.
I think back to one of my favorite movies, and maybe I'll pick it if I ever do an episode myself, was called Life Animated. It was about a young man with autism and how his parents learned to connect with him through Disney movies. The mom says at one point during that movie, who gets to define what a meaningful life is?
Absolutely.
That's success. Is it
that
you
is
get
success.
you get to define
absolutely
what
you
that
define what that looks like. Because it's going to look very different for everyone, but that doesn't mean that you're any less resilient than the next person, or that your success is any less valuable than someone else's success. Right. For him, like, that is great, especially with all of the things that he went through. He went through abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, death, before he was even born, grief and loss. His dad was murdered before he even knew him. Mom was in prison, all of these things. Best friend was murdered. And so for him, it's like, oh my gosh, like, this is so successful. You were able to join the Navy, and you spend, you have all of these languages, and you have a nice girlfriend, and your therapy sessions were perfect, like, so to speak. You just all of these really good connections and things of the sort. But that is success for him. That is what his keep going looked like. Whereas for someone else, maybe their keep going is just not repeating the abuse of repeating the cycle of abuse. You
Yeah.
know, maybe it's loving and speaking loving kindness to their kids or to those around them every single day. Maybe their success is achieving a goal that someone said that they would never be able to achieve. Maybe it's working and living an honest life. Maybe
Sure.
it's that. So resiliency is about the ability to keep going in the face of adversity, to be able to bounce back.
What do you think it was that helped him keep going?
I think that it was connection that helped him keep going. And I say that because even with all of this very difficult phases in his life, Antwone had someone in his life that could offer him something a little bit different. So when he was a kid, he had his best friend Jesse that he talks about, that he says, I basically hung out with him so he wouldn't beat me up. You know, he's like, you know, but there was a specific scene in the movie that we see, you know, when some sexual abuse is going on and Antwone runs out and he...
Which is that his, is that his foster mother's biological daughter? Like, is that
I
his
wasn't sure.
foster sister?
I think he talks about it. I think that they called her Aunt Nadine, but I'm not really sure what her role was.
But she was certainly old. He was one of 3 foster boys in the home, and she was a woman who was certainly older than them, but younger than the foster mother.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. And so, you know, he runs over and he just is breathing heavily, you know, kind of freaked out. No shirt. And when you see him running, he knows exactly where he's going. And Jesse says, did she do it again? You know, he didn't probe. He didn't do anything else. And he said, hey, let's get you some clothes and let's get you something to eat. So even as a kid, these 2 young boys, this young boy is like, this sucks. Yeah, I still see you. And I'm going to kind of nurture that a little bit, you know, and try to meet kind of how we were talking earlier about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Just this basic need of this is what I can do for you. He also talks about at times, even with this foster family, even as horrible as it was, that every now and again they would have nice days. He talks about, you know, if it smelled like pancakes, you know, when he woke up in the morning, that they would have a good day.
Versus eggs and grits.
He said he had to watch his back.
Which that made me wonder, like, I wonder what it was in the mother that went eggs and grits, if she was, I guess, having a bad day versus pancakes.
We guess it could be lots of different things. I mean, eggs and grits are also really quick. You know, you crack an egg, you do this, but I feel like pancakes, you know, you have to get the batter, you have to watch them. There's a little bit more, you know.
I mean, I think it's one of those things where, like, in an abusive relationship, no matter what the nature of the abuse is, you become hyper aware to signals.
Absolutely.
To maintain your own safety. So, I mean, for whatever reason that foster mom would go either way with the breakfast, he learned that as a signal, as a survival skill.
Absolutely.
And that's not unusual. Like anybody that's in an abusive relationship, they learn to attune to the minutia so that they can better be aware and protect themselves.
You know, and in survival mode, right? Mm-hmm. The whole premise of survival mode, when we're in survival mode, is to survive, you know? And so there's things that are heightened and things that we're aware of that says this is not safe.
Yeah. You know, you talked a little bit about abuse happening there. I think this is another example. So like last week's 2 weeks ago, the episode with Rebecca Walker on Spanglish, I watched the movie, I walked into the interview and I thought, I don't know what in the world she's going to talk about, because there's not one thing in this movie. There's 300 things. And I feel like Antwone Fisher's another example of that. There's 300 things in this movie. But I'm wondering if we could talk just a little bit about the abuse that's going on. It's happening on many different levels in the foster home. I think you mentioned, you know, his father and mother. His father was murdered before he was born. He was born. His mother was, I guess, sentenced to time in prison. She was pregnant with him when she entered prison. So he was born in prison. So because of that, he's immediately placed in the foster system. Although at one point he mentioned an orphanage too. So I don't really know how that works.
I think he said he went to maybe an orphanage when he was born, and his mom was supposed to come and claim him when she got out, and she never came to claim him.
Okay.
She never came to get him when she got out. And so he ended up going to the Tates, which is the foster home that he was in up until they kicked him out.
Yeah. Or, I mean, I guess he ran away, whichever. Because I think after... Did he go back after the episode with Nadine?
No, yes, he did. Miss Tate kicked him out as a teenager.
You're right, when he took the shoe.
Because he finally stood up to her.
Yes.
He finally stood up to her, which I think is another important piece, too, about abuse that we see, but that as scared as he was, he talked to Dr. Davenport. He said, I was scared, but he finally kind of stood up to himself and for himself and kind of found his voice and was like, wait, no more. I'm not going to take this anymore.
So the abuse that was happening in the home, Mrs. Tate, she has 3 foster sons there. There's physical abuse happening. Like there's a scene where he and one of his foster brothers, their hands are tied behind their backs and they're tied to a pole. She takes out a rag or a cloth, something like that, wets it, wraps one end around her hand, and then beats them with it.
And to where she beats Antwone unconscious.
Oh, I didn't get that. Really?
Yes, she beat him unconscious.
Wow.
Yes. So very severe physical abuse.
Very severe. There was also sexual abuse happening.
Yes.
At one point when the mother leaves the home, I don't think I had seen Nadine in the movie up until this part. She is in the kitchen, or she comes upstairs or something, because at a basement, and she starts walking towards Antwone, and you can see, so the kid that played Kid Antwone, he was Walt in Lost. Later, he's a really good actor, but you can see him doing little stuff like his breathing quickens, his eyes widen, because he knows what's coming. Absolutely. So when she walks up to him, she is the sexual abuser in the relationship. But I think, and I don't mean any pun by this, I'm struck by her first move is to hit him. Like, so when she comes up, the coast is clear, so to speak, because the mom's left the house. She begins to kind of like sweet talk him a little bit, but then she hits him in the face, grabs his shirt, and says, "Get down in the basement."
Absolutely.
And then, in a move, Denzel's directing this, but in a move that I really appreciated, the camera goes outside the house, and it's in kind of tight on a basement window, and it begins to kind of widen and zoom out, and you hear some of what's being said, and you hear her say something like, "No, pull them all the way down," things like that, and then
coaching,
and then Antwone comes tearing out the front door. This is the scene with Jesse that you were talking about.
Yes.
So we've got this physical abuse, we've got this sexual abuse, but we've also got another layer of abuse that's happening where it's like a power dynamic that's being enforced by the mom. I was wondering if you could talk maybe specifically about that.
Absolutely. And I think they speak about it a little bit in the movie as well, but to elaborate, but just also this sense of verbal abuse, right? And kind of drawing upon that, slave owner mentality, right? Using derogatory terms. So, I recently rewatched the movie as well. One of my favorite movies. I watch it and I'm like, whoa, they say the N-word a lot in this movie, and I don't know why I missed that, the first few times that I watched it, but even just this oppressive terminology in a sense of, he says that, she called us the N-word so much that we could tell which one she was talking to just by the way that she said it. And it's interesting because there's a very powerful scene where she says that, and all 3 of them right there, and they're like, no, that's you. Like, that's not me. That one is you, and it comes into that kind of long-standing debate, you know, of like, is it okay to say, right? Like, there's certain people who can say it, and there's certain people who cannot say it, and all of these things. I think the important thing to highlight is that if it's used as an oppressive term and it's used derogatory, it doesn't matter who says it, the negative impact is still the same.
Yeah, and his foster mother was also African American.
She was also African American.
So, but she was also like taking a position of power and oppression.
Absolutely. You know, and the same, even with that, to me, it doesn't matter if it's with an A or an ER, it's the tone and in the context in which you're saying it, because people know when you're using it, right, to be derogatory, you know, and when it is this power and this sense of I am better than you. And she also, to add on to that, she would also use adjectives of no good before she would say it. She would also use adjectives of
She used the
dumb.
she used the R word.
Yes, she would do that. So it also was not even just the word within itself. It was what other adjectives was she adding with that, right? And I think that if anything, it's really important for all of us to know whether you stand on no matter where you stand on the use of the word is that it's a derogatory term that can cause a lot of pain and hurt and harm to people, especially when it's used oppressively and there's a power dynamic at play.
Yeah.
You know, they also talk about the book. I wish I had more resources, you know, about it, or I can remember the name of the book, but where he talks about how many African Americans had used to own slaves back then, and how they would do that, and how
I think it was Slave Country. I think that's what it was called.
Okay, yes, you know, and he talks about that and gives that to, you know, Antwone, really in a way of trying to help him make sense of it, you know, and for him to try to understand like why, because you know, I think that as a kid too, you know, we're very self-centered at that time. And so we think everything is our fault, and trying to figure out what is it that I could have done to make this person treat me so horribly.
Yeah. In our program, the MFT program at Trevecca, we were talking, I think it was in our divorce care class, and we were talking about children whose parents are going through divorce, and how, because especially younger children, their brains are still so concrete in the way they think. They haven't moved to an abstract ability to process yet. And I know that sometimes it's really easy when you have a kid to say that the kid is selfish because they want, and give me that toy and this thing. But a kid's brain can only conceive things egocentrically.
Absolutely.
You know, it's not that they believe that they have more value than anyone else. And it's not even, I don't think, fair to say that they believe the world revolves around them, but it's just that they can't imagine past the 6 feet of space around them.
Absolutely.
So their world is much smaller. As a consequence, our prof was telling us that's why so many kids really struggle when their parents get divorced with, this is all my fault. Because if the world revolves around me, then that means that everything is kind of based on me as well. And if mom and dad are splitting up, then if only I would have made my bed more, if only I would have done my homework more, fill in the blanks, what have you. So in a similar way, you know, for somebody who, gosh, for his entire upbringing was being abused, that's his normal. That's his, this is how the world works. This is what I can expect.
Right. And I think what I would like to speak to on that piece too is, unfortunately, there can be that's a lot of people's normal, right?
Yeah.
A lot of, well, this has always kind of happened to me, or this is kind of what has always been, and just highlighting or want to encourage people that just because it's been your normal doesn't mean that it's healthy, or that you have to act as if it does not impact you. And I think that that's what we saw with Antwone a lot, kind of before we get into his unpacking of his story, of this, you know, fighting was his normal, right? Like, like whether physically or whether emotionally, mentally, he thought that it was there was an episode, a scene where they were bragging on him about sex. And they're like, we've never seen you with a woman. Like,
Now,
what's going on.
life.
This is in his adult life.
Yeah, in the Navy.
Right? And then he goes and he talks to Dr. Davenport about it. He says, I'm not sure if I'm a virgin or not. And that's when we kind of get introduced to Nadine and kind of her impact and what she had. And just wanting to highlight that sometimes hurtful things become our normal, and so we are resilient and we keep going and we keep fighting and we obtain little successes in these things like that, and just knowing that it's okay if it still impacts you negatively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sexual abuse is going to impact you not just emotionally, but developmentally, socially, relationally, intellectually. Like, it's a trauma.
It is definitely a trauma.
Trauma rocks every part of a person's world.
Absolutely.
When he comes to Dr. Davenport, it's because, and I think this is like the second scene of the movie, he's in the showers, another sailor comes up, and he says, do you have something on your face? And that's when he attacks him. So he gets mandated. There's a scene where he's like, I guess it's a court-martial trial. I'm not really sure. It's some kind of like his punishment is being decided. The commanding officer says to him, like, you said that this other sailor said a racially charged thing to you. Was there something racial in that I didn't catch? Or?
Well, I think the important part is how he interpreted it, right? But he did say, what's that on your face? That is what the guy said. Now, I didn't see anything on Antwone's face, so my guess would be he was either talking about the color of his skin or he was talking about his nose and maybe his features, based on that scene. But when we think about Antwone's history as well, right, and we just talked about the N-word and this, I'm superior to you type of thing like that, I can definitely understand and see how he interpreted it as that way.
Yeah. And we don't, as a person speaking, we don't get to decide what a person hearing is offended by.
Absolutely.
And certainly, Antwone's story and how they depicted in this movie is a good example of the places that we come from providing filters through which we receive our present world.
Absolutely.
So if he's coming from a place where the people that are around him are constantly exercising their power over him, and he expects that, then that becomes something that he can become hyper aware to, and I maybe suspicious of.
Well, I think too, it's this sense of, I've lived all of these years of my life powerless. Like I didn't have a lot of power, or I was the one taking it, and it doesn't matter how big or how small, like I'm going to make sure that I'm not in a position of powerlessness. No one's going to make me feel less than. No one's going to question my spot in the world, my place, or whatever the case may be. And so I'm going to get you before you get me.
Yeah. And that could have been a shade of how his resilience played itself out at that time. I know that there's a part later on in the movie where I think it's Denzel that's saying to him, Denzel's one of these actors where it doesn't matter who or what he's playing, he's Denzel. It's like Tom Cruise. Like, I don't think I know any Tom Cruise character's name.
We're just like Denzel.
Yeah, it's just, that's Tom Cruise, that's Denzel, But at some point he says, like, you've beaten everybody that's tried to stop you. You've won, So he even kind of highlights, I guess, what you're saying is, and maybe that's a good kind of way to shade in and describe his resiliency as well. It's this power dynamic that he keeps encountering. and his determination to say, you may be able to exercise power over me right now, but it's not going to be forever. I will shake free of it.
Absolutely.
And I will keep moving.
Absolutely. And I think him finding his power was a big part of his resiliency.
Oh,
even
yeah.
when we, again, this is my counselor brain, right? But even just the power of, you can make me come. And he said that you can make me come to these sessions, but you cannot make me talk. Right. And then they started talking when he was ready to talk.
Yeah.
And look at how much more was unfolded. Right. And I think that it was just this sense of, I don't want to be a victim, right? Or I don't want to be that powerless little boy anymore, or all of these things. It's like, I have power and I'm going to exert it,
Yeah.
The best way.
He was told to do everything as a kid. So he wanted to be able to be the one that says, now I'm ready.
Absolutely. I'm ready. I'm going to do life, and I'm going to do life on my terms, right? And no one's going to, if you get in my way, then, I have to remove you the best way I know. Sure. I know how. What I thought was interesting too is just Antwone's, like, in some ways, on the outside looking in, or not being a therapist or whatever the case may be, it can seem like some of the things that he got so upset about, they seem so small. But when you have so much trauma and you've had so much perverse things happen to you, that a simple joke doesn't feel like a simple joke to someone who's had that. It's triggering, right? Because, people banter, people, joke around, and a lot of the men on the ship, that's what they felt they were doing. They felt like, oh, we're just kidding around.
They thought it was camaraderie.
We're just doing this. I think when he was reading his book, and one of the guys come up and he's like, what are you reading? And he's just like, why are you always messing with me? And I think just that persona of, oh, like, he's big bad, like, he'll fight you, he'll do this, some might say aggressive, or, he'll come at you and all of these things, but just realizing how much stuff he was dealing with that he still needed to process, and how simple statements to someone else is actually very triggering and very harmful and very hurtful to someone. And I think that is really the difficult and tricky part about trauma, right? Like, physical trauma, we can see that if we fall and break our leg, the likelihood of you coming telling me to stand up is is very slim. You're not going to say, PaQuita, stand up and walk it off. But when we have all of these emotional and mental and even spiritual, I think it was funny. He said, if we caught the Holy Ghost, she would give us vanilla wafers. So we caught it every Sunday, but not even knowing where even that in a sense is spiritual abuse, right? Like, you don't get to praise and worship the way that you want to praise and worship. Like, you see the scene where Miss Tate kind of cuts her eyes at them, and she was
an
like,
exercising power,
right? And so, for him to feel like someone had a one up on him, or somebody, their opinion was going to be bigger or better than his opinion, it's like, no, like, that's triggering, because it put him back in that powerless kind of, I have no power position.
Yeah. I noticed that there was, the initial 3-session work that he did with Davenport. Then when Davenport said, hey, 3 sessions, I'm going to make my recommendation for you to stay. Our time is up. He didn't like that. He pushed back against that. And then there was also, whenever he graduated from his, I guess, Japanese program, and Davenport came to see him and told him again, our time has come to an end. That was triggering in a different way to him.
Absolutely.
He even, Davenport had said, can we go someplace private to talk? They entered into the bathroom, and so whenever he says, our time's up, Antwone lashed out, and he was hitting the wall, and he was saying, I think his words were, why is it that everybody I care about leaves me?
Absolutely. Because that's triggering. I mean, since birth, he literally had people leaving him or abandoning him or neglecting. His father wasn't there. So, it wasn't his fault that his dad was not there, but his dad wasn't there. It doesn't matter whose fault it was, his mom didn't come and get him. Miss Tate, like, even him dealing with all that stuff and her kicking him out, and he even goes in to talk about Jesse, right?
I was gonna say, I think that's what led to that.
Yes, he says, Jesse left me, And even the sense of in the scene, Jesse tries to rob and the guy kills him right in front of, Antwone. But even the sense of who do I have? He only had so few connections in his life, and so it's like I've made a connection with you. I think at this point he's like 25 when he's talking to, Davenport, and all of these things have happened. And this is the first time that someone is actually connected to him and kind of seen him.
I don't know the ethics when it comes to therapists in the military, but like when he invites him over to his house and has him for Thanksgiving and all that.
Yeah, I actually think about that too. And I actually used Antwone Fisher one time as a movie to talk about ethics, right? But I think, so ethically, like my guess is we shouldn't be meeting people in the bathroom or like inviting them over. I will say that the ACA Code of Ethics does talk about dual relationships, right? But it does say, if you decide to do this or whatever, you need to be able to document and say like how it's not going to be harmful, to the client or whatever the case may be. I think though sometimes, and in cases with individuals like Antwone, like the relationship and taking that extra step is really what he needed and what he helped. And when I think about it, who else was he going to get it from?
Yeah. And I think, the guiding behind the start of any ethic that we as therapists come under, whether it's, the ACA or the AAMFT, is 1, do no harm.
Do no harm.
And then 2, is it therapeutic or is it for the benefit of the client?
Absolutely.
So like, I think what you're saying is true. Like in those cases, it was Denzel Port's way of of like just kind of continuing to earn the relational collateral to keep going in that work.
Absolutely. I think so. And I think, even like staying on the ethics piece, I think that it did get to a point where Denzel and his mom was starting to realize, when the wife comes and she said, oh, he invited me to his Japanese ceremony, and he comes up and, he's like, you got to find your own family. I think he got to that point too, where he's like, okay, like you're kind of nestling in and like all of these things. And I think Antwone says it at some point. He's like, why do I need to find my family? I have you. Yeah. And, Denzel Port, as says, is like, you have to find your own family.
There's a couple of times where they showed him looking at Denzel's wife that I just thought, oh, are they gonna go in like is he gonna
it seemed kind of like that. I think Antwone was drawn to like mother figures though, like to like women just in general, like not in this type of thing. But I remember him saying, I looked at your I saw your picture was the first thing that I saw, and I figured if he could marry someone like you, he couldn't be so bad, and I wonder if him looking at her was kind of this safe person, right? Like this safe woman. I mean, that's me speculating, aside from his girlfriend, we didn't see him interact with a whole lot of
But it kind of goes back to what you were saying during your why therapy about there being this ability or influence of the sweet strength of an African-American woman and her ability to speak into or influence a young man. It kind of goes along with that. And maybe for him, he saw her as kind of a counter to Mrs. Tate. Although I wouldn't say that he had much to go off on to make that counter.
He just had a picture.
Yeah, he maybe he just had a sense or a guess, or he did meet her at some point.
Right.
What do you think was it when he was invited to Thanksgiving at their house and he sat down at the table? He's there for just a few minutes and he gets up and leaves. What do you think was going on in that scene?
Well, I think the dad was asking questions, and he was like, don't you miss your mother's cooking? That's what he said to him. And he was like, and he was telling the story about how he missed his mom's cooking and how he would go home for the holidays and all of these things. And I think that was a new experience for Antwone. And when you don't have answers, and you don't know how to answer those things or really where you stand on those things, it makes it really difficult and uncomfortable.
It's a long story.
You know, to say, I mean, what do you say at Thanksgiving? Like, don't you miss your mom's cooking? Oh, I never knew my mom, and my foster family may or may not have cooked Thanksgiving dinner, you know? And so I think it can be difficult and overwhelming for these things when you're still unpacking them and someone's asking you questions. Or in some ways, he kind of made an assumption that he should be missing his mom's cooking. Like, don't you miss your mama's cooking? And it's like, you know, like...
You know what's interesting about that scene too, and kind of going back to Denzel's job directing this, is he took the camera, and as the dad continued to ask questions, he had the camera push in each time and get closer to the dad's face. And like, even I'm watching that scene and I feel myself getting a little elevated.
Yeah, I was uncomfortable. I'm
because
like, stop asking him that.
Well, those questions in and of themselves, harmless. Like, you see those questions written down, harmless.
Right.
But because of Antwone's story, because of the journey that we've already seen him go on, and because of the context from which we know he comes, those questions, like you're saying, they got a little point to them. And it's not an easy answer.
It's not.
It's not a family dinner answer because, you know, how does he unpack that to those? Now, I guess he could have just been polite and lied. Yeah, I sure do. I miss it.
Right.
But that's not always how trauma operates.
It's not. And then it's also, you know, sometimes even those, you know, being polite, it feels like a dishonoring to your own trauma or to your own story, you know, to say like, you know, yes, I do, you know, and to still have to deal with that kind of internally, you know.
And do you think that was a power thing? Like, do you think that him, even if he were to have lied, would have to him meant falling in line, coming under power?
Could have been.
Rather than
you
just saying what was true.
It definitely, it could have been, you know, like I actually like that perspective, but I think also when you don't know what to say, right?
Yeah.
And he kept probing. It was like he wanted something from him that he didn't have to give. You know, and I actually, you know, going back to the counseling piece, I like that Denzel didn't just jump in and be like, no, you know, like, but
he was watching.
For me, but
you saw his eyes going back and forth between the two.
Right. And he's like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't really know, like, how to, you know, save you from this. You know, it was just one of those awkward scenes, but it goes back to how we were saying, like, with trauma. And, you know, when we're saying trauma, we're talking about that physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, verbal abuse, all of that, how things seem so harmless. And we never really know what people are going through. Right.
Yeah.
You know, and just how I think maybe he was fine, but then you ask me this and now I'm triggered, right? Now I'm thinking about this and how uncomfortable that can be and how some people do need to take a step away before they can kind of come back.
Yeah.
And say something, you know, or address it.
Well, it seemed like one of the survival skills that he developed was withdrawing. And sometimes withdrawing inward in himself, like getting quiet, being stoic, you know, kind of a no affect, kind of brick wall kind of thing. Sometimes are really physical, like running away, like he did with Nadine. Like, I gotta stay alive. And maybe that's like, I gotta stay physically alive. Maybe that's, oh my gosh, this line of questions is it's getting so close, it's getting so threatening. I gotta be able to emotionally be able to keep myself together.
Absolutely. Yes. I think there was another one too where all the guys on the ship were talking about when they could go home or stuff like that, and the guy's like, Fish, are you going home? And he just keeps asking, and like, you know, Antwone just doesn't answer him. You know, it's a hard position to be in when someone's asking you questions and you want to be genuine and you want to be honest and you just don't really know how to say it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like you said, how would Thanksgiving dinner go if you're like, oh, well, I was born in prison, you know, my mama never came and got me and I grew up, you know, then it's also not even just that power, but then pity, right? Then how are people going to look at me? Are you going to look at me like I'm a victim? Are you going to look at me like, you know, I'm weak or whatever this case may be?
Yeah.
You know, it's a lot to have to try to
I like that
mitigate.
He became somebody who was able to identify and be proud of his own individual and special strengths. Like, he was an artist who, like, was able to draw these beautiful drawings. He was a poet. He was able to learn languages. And these became things that he was proud of and that he found strength in and that he formed an identity around versus, you know, I guess things like sexuality, like how many, you know, there was that scene where they were in the club and the young lady who only spoke Spanish came up and, you know, was trying to get him to dance. And he wasn't, that was, I think, right before he went to Denzel to talk about the sexual abuse. But
he got into another fight.
yeah, because
the
the
guy
other
was,
sailor,
right.
like, he was alluding to it at first, but eventually he stood up and he called him the F word.
He did. Which was triggering on two things, right? Triggering on the sexual abuse and triggering this using a derogatory term to describe who I am.
Yeah. A former guest, Sasha Corey Pack, who came on, she did the movie Moonlight. She talked about that, the F word, being another word in the African American community, specifically with men, that was used derogatorily. I don't know if I can make that an adverb, but
in a derogatory way,
oppressively, used as a put down kind of thing.
Absolutely, it's pegging you down. It's knocking you down a couple of notches, because if your masculinity doesn't look like this, then you know something wrong with it. You know, and having to make that known.
I want to talk a little bit about Joy Bryant in the movie, about his girlfriend that he meets. Was there anything about that relationship that stuck out to you?
So, one, I love the relationship. I really do love the relationship. But, you know, again, that counselor and me, it was such an ideal, perfect relationship. And the positive side, the strength side, is that you all know I'm all about relationship, is I love that he was able to form this healthy, solid relationship with this woman that he had interest in, Cheryl, who was able to kind of meet him where he was. You know, there was really no judgment in that, you know, from what we see in the movie. We don't know how much he disclosed to her, but, you know, he was like, okay, I got to be honest. I was going to, what do they call it? The psych house or something like that, you know, the nut house. And she's like, okay, like, I understand. You know, she was another character that I felt like kind of allowed him to move at his own pace. She pushed him a little bit, you know, she'd be like, well, what about tomorrow? What about this day? You know,
I thought that was kind of the ideal, because at the beginning it seems like she's really trying to ask him out.
Yeah, she was. Yeah. It seemed like she was trying to ask him out. She's like, you want to go hang out? And he was just kind of like, you know, I don't know. So I love their relationship. I love that she was able to support him, you know, as he found his family. Even at one point, you know, like the sex scene that they kind of cut out, you know, he's like, I've never done this before. And she's just like, you know, be quiet. Like, it's okay. Like, I loved her tenderness and her way to just kind of understand and listen to him as he moved at his own pace.
It didn't seem like she had a predetermined idea of what a man should be like. It seems like she kind of liked Antwone for Antwone.
Absolutely.
Rather than, you know, he is the cookie cutter black man or whatnot.
Yeah, she was very supportive and very like loving, and then that counts the part of me. I'm like, with somebody with a lot of trauma like that, like, is that the ideal, right? Well, I think it's the ideal and it's the goal, and we all want, I mean, me personally, you know, I would want to strive to be that person and be that understanding and be that so deeply rooted and connected, right? But sometimes it gets sticky.
Well, I think that's what I wondered, because, like, you know, coming from the MFT side, you know, water rises to meet its own level. Health is attracted to health. Unhealth is attracted to unhealth. So at least at the beginning of the movie, Antwone is not emotionally available. He's not in touch with his own heart. He is very cut off, and yet she's still attracted to that. Now, towards the end of the movie, he's a different man.
Right.
So it kind of makes me wonder, what was going on inside of her to where she saw that first guy and said, that's the guy for me. I want to go out with him.
Well, I think too, I mean, maybe it goes back, and I could be just shooting off the hip. So it's, you know, you got to be free. So, but I do think though that, yes, I agree with what you said. And I think that maybe, or at least this is what I want to believe, that she had the ability to look beyond his persona and his representative that he was sending out. Because I don't think that I think that he was in survival mode and was cut off for the sake of surviving. I don't think that was who he was.
Representative he was sending out. That is such a beautiful way of putting it. There's a book that I'm reading right now called The Murray Method by Marilyn Murray, and it's talking about ways of resolving childhood trauma. And she says when a trauma occurs, then, you know, it pauses an individual as like a wounded child, and then from that, like a phoenix, rises the survivor. The survivor is, you know, aggressive, it's egocentric, and it's the resiliency. It is I'm going to do whatever it takes to stay alive. And later on, in most of the time, you know, Murray is working with adults who are resolving childhood type stuff. So she begins to highlight the healthy adult, and then the healthy adult will then speak to both the wounded child and the survivor, you know, empathizing with and being compassionate for and parenting the wounded child, thanking the survivor. Thank you for keeping me going. Thank you for keeping me alive. I'm going to choose a different way. I don't need you anymore. I've got this. So to picture his survival skills as a representative that he sends out, that is such, I'm going to steal that. I'm going to use that. That's so beautiful. I love what you're saying. Her recognizing there is something else. Maybe that's not his true self. You know, maybe that is something that he's got to do to keep going, because even when he was kind of cut off, he was drawing, he was writing, you know, he was reading. Even when he's talking to his mom later on in the movie, he says, I've read hundreds of books, you know, this kind of thing.
Right.
You know, so yeah, maybe she was just able to see past that.
Maybe, or maybe it was just the fact they were both in the Navy. You know,
the sample size is small for who you can.
You attractive, I'm attractive. We're both in the Navy.
Hey, I just saw you come out of the psychiatric hospital. That's
right.
okay.
Like, all right.
Yeah.
You know, hey, like slim pickings.
There you go.
Know?
That's funny. So, you know, Davenport suggested him to meet his family. You mentioned before, he said, well, why do I need to do that? I got you. But he still chooses to. So that leads him to turn back up on Mrs. Tate's doorstep to get information from her. She attempts to exercise power again.
Absolutely. Even after all of these years.
Which that's a, you know, MFT systems talk. That is the system that he was in. That was homeostasis. That was, now I'm back around. Did you ever see the show How I Met Your Mother?
No.
So that show, you know what I'm talking about though, that show? Okay.
It's got,
they had a
what's
term.
His name?
Neil Patrick Harris. Yeah.
Yeah.
They had a term in there, and it was something that I had already, this is way before grad school, but I had noticed it. They put a term to it. If you go back home, if you go to your high school reunion, all of a sudden you're acting the way that you used to act. So they called it revertigo. And I thought that was clever and funny. Yeah. So he shows back up and revertigo happens. You see Mrs. Tate begin to exercise that power, and you see for a split second, he even casts his eyes down as if he was a little kid. But then he very quickly, like she puts her hand on his shoulder. He shakes it off, moves back and says, no, I'm not coming in. I'm not doing that. I'm just here to ask a question. You know, he gets his answer. He follows that rabbit hole down to where he eventually calls his aunt. Yeah, it was his dad's
baby
little sister. Yeah.
What she said, I think her name was Aunt Annette or something. You were talking to your auntie Annette.
She invites him, I think it was Thanksgiving dinner. Or maybe it was just a Sunday
I think
dinner.
It was just a random day.
That's
honestly, it was just
that's a lot of people for a normal.
It was. Well, first she invited him over to just meet him and the girlfriend, and then that's when it cuts to the scene for him to go meet his mom.
Yeah,
Viola Davis.
Which I would imagine he got mom's information from
the uncle that was there. Yeah, they said, "Oh, she lives right over there." And when he comes back, that's when it was a lot of people. Yeah. It was a lot of people. It was for a very important cause too, though.
Oh, you know what? That's why. It's because he was coming back. That's why they were all there.
This was their first time like meeting him, or they didn't know about him. Yeah. I think is what I gathered was that they didn't even know that the mom was pregnant. Because I think they said, "Did your dad know?" And he said, I wasn't sure if my dad knew because mom was already in prison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He does get a chance to meet his mom. I don't know what he was looking for by going to meet his mom. I don't think he got it. Because when he shows back up later with Denzel, he talks about forgiving his mom in his heart. Mm-hmm. So I was led to believe, which any movie you watch, you get a slice of a story. Mm-hmm. You don't get the full thing. I was led to believe, and I kind of imagined, at least the story I told myself, was that he didn't continue on in a relationship with his mom after that. But that kind of gave him a little closure.
Well, I think, and so for me, I don't think that Antwone had any real expectations of wanting anything from his mom. I think that it was something that was necessary. And I think that he had been making up stories and alternate endings for so long that I think just by him being able to go and actually see her and speak his piece, I felt like that he did get what he needed. And he was at a point where he's like, if I never have to have a relationship with her again, like there was some sense of healing that he got from that, to where he didn't feel like he needed to continue grasping.
Yeah. That felt to me to be a real self-defining moment, because he did say to his mom stuff about, I know 2 languages, I'm working on a 3rd. Mm-hmm. I have read hundreds of books. Like, it was like him really kind of saying, this is now how I will define myself.
And, honestly, I also think that he gave her, maybe whether she asked for it or not, I think that he gave her some peace or some kind of, because he said, I'm a good person. Mm-hmm. It was almost like, even though he wasn't like letting her off of the hook or anything, I feel like he was also trying to say, I'm okay.
He said, I never did drugs. I've never smoked a cigarette.
I've never been in trouble with the law. Yeah. Like, I think that he's like,
you don't have to worry about
I think that
me.
was some of that forgiveness of like, even with the decision that you made that laid me down this entire path, I still turned out all right. Like, I'm still good in a sense of I have accomplished things, and then he even gives this form of affection where he gives her a kiss kind of like on the cheek, and then that famous one tear that she has that, just kind of rolls out, and he leaves. And I think that, to me, that speaks to trauma as well, and boundaries and lots of things. And sometimes we have to have that moment and that closure. It's not always going to look like that. But sometimes healing from your trauma or healing from your wounds doesn't mean that, wounds. I said rooms. Healing from your wounds doesn't mean that you have to be in relationship with this person or this thing or this place. Sometimes it's acknowledging it for, whatever it is, getting your closure and figuring out how you continue to thrive and continue to move without being stuck.
Yeah.
Right? Like, imagine if you've never met your mom, our brains are meaning-making machines. They're going to continue to come up with stories after stories. And I think that he finally had something that he could say, okay, now I can put a period and turn this page.
Yeah. I could almost see that helping him feel like a real person.
Absolutely.
Because to not be able to say where you're from, where your parents are, who they were, there's just such a big question mark there. And so for him to then be able to say, my mom lives in, or maybe even he would say it, my birth mom, or however he would say it.
Right.
And then from there, he comes back to that big family dinner.
Which was his dream, right?
And it was really, what's so funny it was a total bookend to that first scene, that dream. Because in the first scene, he enters into that barn and there's this long table and there's people around it, but it's presented as there's something kind of, the only word I can think of is dreadful, like anxiety producing or dreadful about that first kind of dream scene. And in this one, it is presented as almost like, it literally is a homecoming, like a welcoming, a loving acceptance, belonging kind of thing. And he comes in and it's, oh, I'm your aunt and I'm your cousin
and I'm your uncle.
Yeah, yeah. And everybody's so excited to see him. And then I thought this was kind of funny. Like there's like a room where they open up the doors and all the old people are back there. It's like they kept all the old people in a separate room and they were all like sitting, and it was really like they were sitting like it was the Last Supper, like it was this big long table and they were on the opposite side of it. And he comes in and I thought that was maybe his grandmother. Like his dad's mom?
It was never sure. It was never clear to me. I would think that whether it was the grandmother or not, she was definitely presented as the matriarch of the family. So it goes, back to when you're talking about like the Tyler Perry thing, like a Medea, like, every Black family, I mean, that's the only one I can speak for, has like this matriarch, and sometimes it's the grandmother, sometimes it might be the aunt, but you have the centralized,
Is she like, is that person like the hub that all of the spokes of the family
we call it the glue that keeps everyone together. So you have that, and I think that's what she was representative of. So I don't know what her relation was, but my guess based on the scene and how everyone got quiet when she said quiet down and all of that she was probably like that go-to person.
She didn't even say anything. I kind of wondered, is she deaf or is she mute? Because when he walks in, she knocks on the table and motions with her hands for him to come, and then he circles the table and she just holds out both her hands, and it's that symbolism from the beginning again. It's this perfect bookend where she puts out her hands and he puts his hands in hers. She draws him in, puts her hands on his face, and she's like trembling and her eyes are welling up, and she just says, welcome.
And then they're like, let's eat.
Yeah. And then,
Right? So like, I mean, like you said, it's packed with so much, and like even as much as we've covered, right? There's still many
more.
stuff so much stuff that we can look at.
Yeah.
But I like, when you first, even as I was rewatching it, when it first comes on, you have no idea what Antwone Fisher is going to be about, but even what I like about that last scene too is the pancakes. Like, they keep that theme of the pancakes kind of consistent.
That's how he knows everything's going to be all right.
And it's just, it's such a beautiful movie that's rich in so much, and so many different angles that it can be attacked from.
Yeah. Well, I loved it.
Good.
So I'm wondering, can you tell me something that your clients have taught you?
I think something that my clients have taught me, it's kind of a paradox, but it's not. It's this, how do you jump right in with where they are, and how do you be patient at the same time?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because sometimes, especially as a counselor, and if Antwone walked through my door, I'm just going to be honest, I'd be like, well, we have to talk. We have to do these 3 sessions, managed care isn't going to let me, let us just sit here. Or, why are you wasting your money? Like, it would always be this wanting to jump in, wanting to be like, you're here, Antwone, like, let's look at this, like, let's get you together. But then it's also, how do you find that balance between being patient and actually really moving at their pace? And not just their pace because that's their preference, but because that's what's necessary for their sense of healing.
Yeah. And how have they kind of taught you that? Is it just meeting each individual where they are and letting them?
I think it's meeting each individual where they are. I think I tell every last one of my clients, if I'm doing something that you don't that you don't want to do, or you don't want to go, use your voice and say it. So sometimes it's a verbal, like, I'm not ready to do this. And it's me just taking that step back and say, well, where are you ready to go? or sometimes it's my own awareness and I go back and I apologize and I say, you know what, I think I was moving too fast because this is where I wanted you to go. Whether that's because I believed that you were able to do, and I recognize that maybe we missed a couple of steps.
Yeah.
So it
or sometimes as a therapist, it's about, I'm making it about me. I want to go there versus what do you need to go.
Yeah, and getting curious, what else is at play? Like I said, or maybe I didn't say it, I meant to say it, it's sometimes it's not what you see, is what you don't see that's at play, so also getting curious about what else is it right now that could be at play. You can do one intervention with one client and it can be amazing and you feel like the best therapist in the world and that you should be making like $400 a session because boom, you got it, and then you use the same exact intervention with another client and you're like, why am I licensed?
Yeah, it's like a fart in church. Like it just lands.
Why do I have a caseload? Like I should probably, pack up and just go own a bakery or something, So even that, like I think that the experience within itself sometimes indirectly teaches me that, and I really value those times where directly it teaches me how to jump in and be patient at the same time.
Yeah, I think it just speaks to, I think that this job requires us as individuals and clinicians to be present. And, part of asking every guest why therapy, part of asking every guest, tell me something your clients have taught you, is just to highlight, as therapists, we're people too.
Absolutely.
And we get something, now it's a different kind of relationship, the therapeutic relationship, and yet we still get something out of it. That was even shown in Denzel Port and Antwone's relationship in the movie.
Absolutely.
Like he got something out of it too, but like we as people, we still have to do self-care. We still have to make sure that we can be present with our clients because every person is so unique. And so what you're saying, one intervention applied to a second individual may not work. Right. Because of who they are and their story. Those questions at the Thanksgiving dinner were normal questions, but for him as an individual were triggering and hurtful, and they brought up, painful memories. So just that constant, and that's why we get trained. We get trained to hopefully work out those things in us that are blocks to us being present with another person. Right. Just normally or specifically when we get triggered or, when something is brought up in us, how is it that we can still be honest with our feelings and yet still be present for somebody else? Let's say that somebody was listening to today's episode and they just feel like they could really connect with you and they would like to see you as a client. How can they get a hold of you?
Okay, so I do have a Psychology Today profile, which is probably going to be the quickest way to get a hold of me. It also has a little bio of a little bit about what I do, payment options that I take, modalities that I am. So if you go to that, you can send me an email directly. So my name is PaQuita, which we said at the beginning. So that's PaQuita, and if you get that far, I promise you I will be the only one that pops up. Because I've done it myself.
Sure.
So if you get to, PaQui, then I'm telling you I will be the first one. And it has my location there and like all of those things. So that would be the quickest and easiest way.
Nice. Okay. PaQuita, thank you so much.
Thank you for
being on today. It has been such an honor and it's just been so fun. And I'm so glad to have had a chance to meet you.
Thank you so very much.
Nice. Hey gang, this is usually the point in the show where Leanne joins me and offers her thoughts on both the movie and the interview that I have with a guest, but as I said in the intro, this week she needed to say no to the show so that she could say yes to a few other things. And so it's just going to be me during the wrap-up. I absolutely loved the time that I got to spend with PaQuita, and I absolutely loved Antwone Fisher as the movie. And a couple of thoughts that I had after my conversation with PaQuita, I just wanted to share, in addition to what we talked about during it. I think that if you were to look at the individual Antwone Fisher, in real life and at the end of the movie, you would see somebody who, by every measure, is successful. Screenwriter, book author, not graduate, veteran of the armed service, just a successful guy. And yet he was affected deeply by the trauma that he went through as a child. And so I think that from that, I would just say that trauma can affect anybody. And having trauma in your life, being affected by trauma, does not mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean that you're not capable. It doesn't mean that you're not successful. It means that something was visited upon you that should not have been visited upon you. I've mentioned it before in a past show, but if you want to think about trauma in terms of two types, the first type would be invasive trauma. Invasive trauma is anything that happens to you that should not have happened to you. Typically, when we think about trauma, this is the type we think about. It would include anything like sexual trauma, sexual assault, maybe like physical trauma, like getting beat up, getting abused in that way, verbal, emotional trauma, maybe like what a colleague here in town calls domestic terrorism, just kind of instilling fear in somebody. These are things that are being done to you that in a healthy environment would not be done to you. The other type of trauma, so that would be invasive. The other type would be abandonment trauma. Abandonment trauma is when something didn't happen to you that should have happened to you. So that would be like if a parent leaves very suddenly and you don't have closure on that. It would be whenever a parent maybe even sticks around but is not fulfilling that parent role. So Antwone Fisher, very successful person, and yet encountered all of this trauma that was visited upon him. He had no agency in selecting it. He didn't ask for it. He didn't want it, and yet here he was in there and did the best he could for so long. And then as an adult, was able to meet with a therapist, process that trauma, and then grow from it. Not grow from the trauma, but grow almost, I don't even want to say in spite of it, but able to understand it in a way that he integrated it with his story, able to develop the skills, the tools, to walk forward from it, to know that the techniques that I've used to survive in the past, I no longer have to use those. I'm going to get new ones that I can use to walk away from this. And so I think what I would just say to anyone out there, if you're listening and you have trauma in your past, it is not your fault. It's not your fault that this was visited upon you. You don't have to bear that responsibility. And if you need to reach out and receive help to recover from that trauma, I want you to know that that's possible. I want you to, if you know anyone that has received mental health care, that has seen a therapist or counselor, you could, if you trust them, share with them that you have some things that you would like some help with and ask for a recommendation. If you don't have anybody in your life that you would be comfortable trusting with that, because not everybody deserves every part of our story, then I want to invite you to email me. You can email me at therapisttheater@gmail.com. That is not a confidential email address in the sense of it's not encrypted. I can't guarantee that confidentiality be a part of that. But if you want to email me and ask for a next step or what to do, or even for help in finding a therapist in your area, I would be happy to help you with that. But in Antwone Fisher's life, I love what PaQuita highlighted. He had these connections with people, and those connections were able to become protective factors in his life and help him steer out of the effects the trauma was having on him. And so just want to say thanks to PaQuita for coming on the show. It was an absolute honor and an absolute pleasure. Just want to say thank you to you for listening to the show. This is the 44th episode of Therapist Theater, and it's something that I just continue to marvel at that I get to do. It's an incredible honor and a privilege to be able to sit with so many great guests and to hear their thoughts and their wisdom and learn from them in areas that I haven't studied. And it's an incredible privilege to be able to be welcomed into your ears. That's weird. Every week. And I'm just really thankful for that. So thanks so much for sticking with us, for listening. And Leanne will be back next week. I think we can say you can raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say that for this week, the theater is closed.